Grief didn't make me afraid of the dark. It made me afraid of the moment the light comes on and shows you what's changed. So when my phone rang and the electrician said, "Don't open that box alone," my first thought wasn't electricity, it was truth. Have you ever kept a room exactly the way they left it because you're terrified that moving one thing might erase them? What would you do if a year after your wife died, a stranger stood in her workshop and whispered, "There's a box hidden in her wall, and you shouldn't open it alone"? Would you call your kid, your brother? Or would you go alone because you've been pretending you're strong enough to be two people and you don't want anyone to hear you break? I'm a single dad now. That's the phrase the world uses when they see one plate less at your table and a girl who learned to fold laundry before she learned to parallel park. Some mornings I can fake it. Other mornings the coffee machine sounds like the ventilator I can't forget. And the only thing I'm good at is telling my daughter June I'm fine. Have you ever told a teenager you're okay because you need them to believe it so you can borrow their belief? "Don't open that box alone," he said again, softer this time, like it wasn't about voltage at all. His name is Gabe. I'd hired him to rewire Naomi's old workshop because the cloth-wrapped wires hummed like bees whenever a storm rolled in, and I couldn't stand one more night of listening to a wall sing and wondering if the house would burn down while I was practicing bravery. He respected her space like a church. He'd ask permission before moving a clamp. He knew the smell of sawdust and lemon oil that still clung to the door jamb like her laughter had a scent. "Where?" I asked, and he exhaled like a man who had been holding air for years in case this moment came. "Behind the pegboard, left of the window. It's painted the same color as the studs, taped in plastic. There's a note too, marker scrawl on the back of the board." He hesitated. It says, "Don't open that box alone." Have you ever heard your dead wife talk in someone else's mouth? My hands went cold on the steering wheel. Naomi loved secrets, but the good kind. Birthday cakes hidden in the back of the fridge behind a kale bin I'd never open. Notes folded into the toes of my boots before a long shift. "Come home safe. The dog misses you. I miss you worse." She wasn't a liar. She was a planner. A woman who built dovetails so tidy you couldn't slip a human breath between them. If she hid a box in a wall and left a rule about it, what was I about to learn about the part of our life I wasn't in? On the drive, everything I've been out running, road shopping. What if it's money? What if it's debt? What if it's letters meant for someone not named me? What if it's medicine she didn't take because she wanted one more good month? What would you do if the answer to all your late-night bargains fit inside a lunch pail-sized rectangle humming inside a wall? I should have called June. That's the honest line. And the lie is I told myself I didn't because she had algebra club and I didn't want to yank her out of the only thing that makes her forget the chair at the table that isn't empty so much as haunted. The real reason, fear of what her face would do if I opened that box and pulled out something sharp. Can you imagine handing your kid a truth you can't dull first? Her workshop sits behind the house, a small rectangle with a pitched roof Naomi always promised to paint red and never did because finishing things for herself wasn't her hobby. The knob stuck like it always did when it rained. I stood there with my hand on the metal, telling myself it was just a door, just a room, just air that used to be easier to breathe. I hadn't turned on that switch in months. You don't control grief with your thumb. "Don't open that box alone," I said out loud, trying to put on the words to see if they fit better in my mouth than on the wall. They didn't. They sounded like a dare and a mercy. What kind of woman who loved me the way she did would warn me off a thing she made unless the thing inside it could save me or split me? My palm left a sweat print on the metal. I slid a flathead under the lip and stopped, not because I was noble, not because I was brave, because my heart started to gallop like it remembered another room with machines and the sound they make when they don't come back in time. Have you ever paused with a tool in your hand because you're suddenly 14 in a garage you can't afford to fix? The light flickered. A storm was thinking about coming, or my nerves were. The breaker box in the corner ticked as if it had a point of view. I reached for the switch out of habit, then snatched my hand back like the room might bite. I hadn't touched that switch in months, because you don't control grief with your thumb. My phone buzzed again. "Gabe," a simple text. "You sure?" 2 words that weighed as much as the box. I stared at them until the rating blurred. The house creaked. The pegboard sighed. I could hear Naomi laugh in my head. "You're overthinking, baby. It's a box. Open it." But right there, with the screwdriver biting the seam, I froze. Not because I'm a coward, because this was the first time in a year I didn't know if opening something would make me less alone or more. Have you ever stood in the doorway of a choice and felt your hand shake? I pressed the blade into the seam. The tape gave a little, like skin ready to scar. Somewhere behind me, the fridge kicked on in the house and made me jump like a fool. I exhaled so hard I felt my ribs complain. Then I heard her again, not from my head this time, but from inside the wall where the box waited, patient as a secret. Her voice, or the memory of it, or the way grief turns air into words if you're desperate enough. "Don't open that box alone." It was the same sentence, but it sounded like a promise instead of a warning. I set the screwdriver down. I put my hand flat on the metal, and with the storm darkening the workshop windows and 100 little wooden birds Naomi had carved lining the rafters like witnesses I never noticed until that second, I did the bravest thing I've done all year. I stepped back. I took out my phone, and I finally dialed the one person whose voice I was most afraid to break in front of.
June picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Dad? There's something about the way your kid says your title that can turn you into either a soldier or a ghost. Can you come home?" I asked. "From the workshop," I added, like the word itself needed guarding. Gabe found something in Mom's wall. A breath. Not scared, careful. "I'm on my way." She hung up before I could be brave for her. Waiting is its own kind of electricity. I stood in the doorway with the switch at my fingertips, and all the reasons I'd kept this room like a photograph came crowding in. Have you ever made a museum of someone's life because you were afraid if you dusted too hard, the memories would rub off? Naomi's workshop is a 12 by 20 with a pitched roof and a door that sticks when it rains. She always said she'd paint it barn red and stencil swallows under the eaves. She did the swallows with a pencil one summer afternoon and never got around to the paint, which is very Naomi. Big first move, gentle follow-through, 100 little half-finished mercies that mattered more than the projects she sold. She could bend wood to his will and make it look like the wood had volunteered. I met her in a hardware store. I was buying screws. She told me I picked the wrong length for the board thickness I described to the board clerk. She said, "You'll blow out the back." Tapped her knuckle on the counter. I said, "Then I'll hide it with putty." She laughed and called me a sinner. I told her she sounded like she loved a good dovetail more than most people love their pets. "Guilty," she said, and grinned like a planer shaving curls off my ribs. Have you ever fallen in love with someone because they're better at what you love than you are, and it doesn't make you small, it makes you hungry? We built the workshop before we had June, before we had a couch that listed to one side. She framed it with a friend and a rented nail gun, scribbled jokes and dates on the studs as if the bones of the place needed to laugh to stand. When the roof went on, she lay flat on her back on the new plywood and said, "Listen, the swallows like us." I heard nothing but my own blood. She said they always come home, pointing at the air and naming birds I couldn't see. I married her in a courthouse with clean lines and bad lighting because she wanted to buy a planer instead of a dress. I liked that about us. Our paper was legal, the rest was something we built. Then cancer. There, I said it once, came like a rude guest who wouldn't wipe his feet. It moved like a rumor, fast, and by the time the hospice nurse taught me how to fold a fitted sheet with grace, because grief makes you cling to corners, Naomi's workshop had already turned into an echo. I locked the door the day we came back from the hospital without her and told myself it was temporary. Have you ever meant to pause and realized you hit stop? June and I orbit the kitchen like two moons afraid of each other's tides. She's 15. She holds her grief like sarcasm because kids understand that laughter is just crying in a better outfit. She learned how to fold towels the way the hospice nurse told me because I couldn't keep the edges aligned without thinking of breath and beeps and that last night when the power hiccuped and I watched monitors like traffic lights. I told her I was fine. I've been telling her I'm fine for a year because I need at least one of us to believe it for a few hours at a time so I can borrow that belief and make pancakes. Money stayed loud for months. Insurance covered the first punch and then shrugged. I sold a motorcycle that didn't look right in the driveway without Naomi sitting on the back pretending she was cooler than me, but actually being it. I did the math in the notebook with oil stains that used to hold parts lists. The workshop wiring hummed every time the sky grumbled. I told myself it was Naomi sanding in my dreams. Then a thunderhead rolled through and the lights in the house hiccuped and I saw a flash at the corner seam by her workbench. My heart tried to crawl out my throat. Have you ever been more afraid of a fire you imagined than of the one that already burned you? I called a man recommended by a retired carpenter at the thrift store. He does right by old bones, the man said. That's how Gabe showed up in my life. Respectful boots, eyes that asked permission before his mouth did. He paused at the threshold like it was church. Mind if I step in? He said. People who understand shrines are rare. He unplugged everything like he was undressing someone with reverence. He labeled breakers as if they were loved ones. He pointed out the cloth-wrapped wires in the wall and said, "These are tired." He promised to be careful. He kept that promise, and then he called me today and delivered a sentence that sounded exactly like Naomi. Don't open that box alone. I can still see her the night we fought about the same thing that would save me later. She'd been sanding a tabletop at 1 a.m., green glowing under her hands like a secret. I said, "You have to slow down." She said, "This is how I breathe." And how am I supposed to breathe when I hear a sander at 1 in the morning and think it's a heartbeat I can't fix? I snapped. She put the tool down, stepped close, and pressed her dust-soft cheek to my chest. "Then stand with me," she said. "Don't tell me to be smaller. Be here." We made up, but that sentence turned into a splinter we never took out. I've been trying to fix everything alone since I was 12, and my dad handed me a busted mower and said, "Be a man." Naomi never asked me to be a man. She asked me to be with her. There are still notes in the house I haven't touched. One lives in the toes of my winter boots. Buy milk, love yourself like I do. Another is stuck in the inside of the sugar jar, proof she knew where I went when I couldn't sleep. There's a voicemail from hospice I can't delete, the nurse reminding me to drink water and sit like those are optional hobbies. And there was always a little metal box Naomi kept under the left side of her bench, dented and ugly the way things are when they matter more than they look. Junk, she'd say if I asked. My good junk. I didn't press. I thought marriage meant trusting what's in a person's hands without needing the inventory. Maybe I was lazy. Maybe she was building a language I didn't know how to read yet. June says I talk about mom like the weather. She's always there, but I pretend I'm surprised when she rains. She's right. I kept the room exactly the way Naomi left it because I believed the lie that grief is a freeze frame, not a workshop. I dusted the tools sometimes, gentle as prayer, and pretended I wasn't rearranging my own ghost. I left the pencil nub in the crack in the bench. I let the light bulb over the drill press burn out and didn't replace it because I told myself the shadows belonged to her. Have you ever protected your pain like a pet and then wondered why it keeps biting you? The first storm after the funeral, the power hiccuped and the workshop hummed like a lullaby you don't want to fall asleep to. I stood at the breaker box with my palm on the metal cover and felt vibrations like a faraway train. I knew then I couldn't let the house pretend. I scheduled Gabe. He showed up with his label maker and a respect I haven't seen in men my age since my dad whispered, "Nice cut," when I finally shaved without bleeding. He asked me the first day, "Do you want me to relocate any outlets while I'm in the walls?" And I heard Naomi saying, "Don't change my map." I told him to leave everything where it was. That's what grief does. It makes you confuse a plug with a person. He didn't argue. He just nodded and said, "Then I'll be careful." He worked 3 mornings with the radio low, the kind of oldies station that thinks Don Henley is a spiritual practice. He'd call out when he found something interesting, old nails smoothed to coins, a pencil message on a stud that said 1998, ran out of screws, married the guy anyway. We laughed. I went back to the kitchen and practiced washing the same cup twice so my hands had something to do. And then the phone rang today, and the word box changed the air around my head. You want to know the part I'm not proud of? Earlier, before I called June, my hand found a flathead and I slid it in the seam of the plastic like I could pick the lock on a future. I felt tape give. I felt my heart try to climb out and run. And then the room itself said her sentence back to me in that way the world does when you're paying attention. Don't open that box alone. I stepped back. I chose different. But the truth is, I put my fingerprints on something she asked me to hold with 4 hands, not 2. The truth is, I still think I can earn love by carrying it all by myself. A car door slammed in the driveway. Gravel shifted, June's shoes on stone, fast, then stopping like she needed one more breath before she became a person in a story instead of a person in a hallway. "Dad?" she called, not quite stepping over the threshold. "Back here," I said. My voice sounded like the shop felt, hollow and holy. She stepped in and the air changed. That room knew her. Her ponytail, her bitten thumbnail, the way she touches wood with the back of her fingers like it's a small animal. She looked at the open gap by the pegboard, at the taped rectangle like a heartbeat behind a rib cage, then at me. I could see the question on her face. Why didn't you call me first? I wanted to say 1,000 things, practical lies, pretty truths. I said what I could live with. I almost made a mistake. I didn't. I want you here. She nodded, but not like forgiveness, more like proceed. I eased the pegboard away just enough to show her the backside where Naomi's printing slanted left the way it always did. Don't open that box alone. June's face cracked down the middle. She pressed her wrist to her mouth, then let it fall. "That's her," she said, like there was a chance it wasn't. Why would she didn't finish. Some questions deserve the rest of the sentence, and some only need the question mark. Have you ever watched your child read a note meant for you and realize it was meant for them too? I thought of all the times I told her I'd take care of it, as if care was a sink of dishes, not a door you open with 2 hands. My phone buzzed on the bench. Gabe again. "I can swing back if you want a witness," he texted. Witness. The word landed with weight. Naomi didn't write "don't open that box alone" because she didn't trust me. She wrote it because she trusted the kind of man she married, the kind who thinks muscle is enough. She wrote it like a law to save me from my worst habit.
She wrote it for June too, because she knows us both, the fixer and the forgiver, the girl who will try to be brave and the man who will try to be everything but real. "Should we wait for Gabe?" June asked, eyes on the lip of the box, hand on my sleeve. I didn't answer right away. I was listening to the house, to Naomi, to the part of me that knows better when I'm not trying to prove something. Somewhere under the bench, a pencil rolled and settled with a tiny click, like a timer starting. Outside, a pair of swallows cut the air under the eaves where she'd drawn their silhouettes years ago, their bodies filling in the lines she'd left for them. June squeezed my arm. "Dad," June said again, and this time it sounded less like a question and more like a chord we were about to play together. I texted back, "Come." Then I slid the screwdriver farther away and told the truth out loud to the room that has heard every version of me. Gabe texted back one word that felt like a seatbelt clicking. "Coming." Then 15 minutes. 15 minutes is a lifetime when a sentence in your wife's handwriting is staring at you from the backside of a wall. Don't open that box alone. June stood beside me with her hand in the crook of my elbow, anchoring me like she used to when she was little and crossing streets felt like math we might mess up. "Power first," I said, grateful for any instruction that sounded like control. We stepped to the sub-panel in the corner. The breakers were labels in Gabe's neat block letters. Outlets, lathe, bandsaw. The one that hummed when a storm rolled through had a strip of blue tape over it. I flipped it. The workshop exhaled. Have you ever killed the power to a room and felt your heart keep trying to supply voltage anyway? "We can wait," June said. It wasn't a suggestion, it was mercy disguised as statement. I nodded like a man agreeing to a diet with a cookie already in his mouth. I eased the pegboard back. The smell of old tape and cooler years climbed out, metallic, sweet, like someone canned a season and hid it in my wall. There it was, the box, the size of a lunch pail if he were the kind of person who actually took lunch and remembered to eat it. Painted beige like builders do when they don't love a place like we did. wrapped in cloudy plastic and bandaged with cloth electrical tape, neat and intentional. It bulged slightly where the tape had dried and pulled. June leaned in, eyes sharp. "She painted it to disappear," she whispered, reverent and a little offended, like it owed the wall rent. Her fingers hovered over the seam, then retreated. She looked at me. "Let's wait for Gabe." I meant to say yes. I meant to slide the pegboard back into place like a man who can listen to the best part of himself. Instead, I said, "Just let me see if it's loose." That's the sentence you carry to every regret you've ever met. Have you ever asked permission from a problem and then given it to yourself? 2 short screws held the box's bracket to a stud, paint fossilized over their heads. I found a bit that fit. The driver motor was dead with the breaker off, so I did it by hand, each turn a counting game for my worst habit. 1, you promised. 2, Gabe is coming. 3, June is here. 4, don't be your father. The bracket let go with a soft pop, like a jar you shouldn't have opened yet. I slid the box into my hands and almost dropped it because it was heavier than the size promised. Paper and metal and something that rattled like a small key trying to be brave. June's voice turned small. "Dad?" It wasn't fear, it was trust looking for a place to sit. I set the box on the bench, careful like a nurse with a cup of pills. My palms left sweat prints. The tape at the seam had frayed just enough to tempt a flathead under it. I told myself I wasn't opening it, I was checking it. I told myself I was making it safer for later. I told myself a lot of things I've told myself since I was 12 and believed manhood was a list of chores you do without witnesses. "Gabe said 15 minutes, June repeated. "We should wait." "I grabbed the safety goggles," I said, defaulting to the tone that keeps you alive around spinning blades and kills you around people you love. She hesitated, caught the dodge, then moved anyway because she's kinder than my fear deserves. She turned toward the cabinet. Her back was to me for maybe 10 seconds. I peeled the tape. It gave with a sound like old skin letting go. The plastic wrap crackled. Under the lid, a sliver of dark paper and a circle of brass winked like an eye. My chest did that too fast flutter I used to mistake for running when it was really panic. Just a peek, I lied to nobody. I lifted the lid a thumb's width, then 2. The smell of my wife, lemon oil and graphite and something like cedar hope breathed out into my face so strong I had to close my eyes. Have you ever missed someone so much your lungs forget the present tense? Inside, nestled tight like she'd Tetrised our future, lay 3 envelopes bound with red thread. Her printing on each made my vision double. Open with June. Open at the river. Open if you're ready. Beneath them, a small brass key on a red thread loop. Beside them, a palm-sized cassette recorder with a sticker in Naomi's handwriting that said, "Press play with someone." I went light-headed, like I'd stood up too fast inside my own life. She knew me. She knew I'd try to carry it. She built a map that forced me to share the weight, and I was already breaking the first rule. June set the safety goggles on the bench with a clack that made me jump. I dropped the lid instinctively, stupidly, caught the edge of the cassette recorder with my ring and jostled it. The play button depressed with a soft, traitorous click. A hiss uncoiled, warm and analog, the sound of a decade we didn't live in together but somehow shared anyway. Then her voice filled the dust between us. "Hey you." It wasn't an old voicemail. It wasn't a memory. It was Naomi in the room, breath in the microphone, smile living between words. I froze. June did too. The tape warbled and steadied. "If you're hearing me, it means I didn't get to say all the words out loud, so I tucked some of them in places you'd only find if you weren't trying to be a hero." A wet laugh. "If you pressed play alone, baby, stop. Wrap me back up. Wait for June. Wait for light." Have you ever been held accountable by a ghost? My thumb hovered on stop like it weighed 100 pounds. June's eyes were already shining the way eyes do when they find a road they thought was paved over. "Dad," she whispered, not scolding, not pleading, inviting. I hit stop. The room sighed. The cassette motor clicked down. My heart didn't.
We stood with the box open a crack, truth peeking out like it was shy and brave at the same time. I closed the lid gently, like tucking a child in. I reached for the tape, fumbled. Cloth tape that's been living on the edge of its job doesn't like second chances. It peeled with furry edges that wouldn't stick to anything but my own fingers. My guilt put on clown shoes and tripped over itself. "I'm sorry," I said to June, and meant it for more than the last 30 seconds. "I shouldn't have." She nodded, one clean gesture that held both hurt and something harder, relief that I'd said it before she had to. "We'll do it right," she said, and slid the box closer to her side of the bench, like she was staking a claim Naomi had left vacant on purpose. My phone buzzed. "Gabe, 2 minutes." Tires found our gravel a breath later. The workshop seemed to square its shoulders. I stared at the 3 envelopes like they were rooms in a house I was told to enter with someone holding my hand. Open with June. I could feel the words settle between us like a bench suddenly appears when your legs give up. Open at the river where we skipped stones and argued kindly about whether flat ones really skip better or if it's just a metaphor men like me use to pretend physics is poetry. Open if you're ready. I didn't know what ready meant anymore. I haven't since the hospice nurse put a glass of water in my hand and called it brave to drink it. Something rattled softly when I moved the box. Metal on wood, deliberate, rhythmic, like a bead trapped in a puzzle begging you to solve it. A sliver of folded paper sat under the recorder, edges softened by handling. I didn't pull it out. I didn't need to. I could see the title in Naomi's pencil. Swallow. Not a sentence. A bird. A promise. A map. Gabe's shadow crossed the threshold. "Knock, knock," he said, without knocking, because some rooms you ask differently. He took one look at our faces and the non-zero distance between the lid and the base, and didn't say "I told you so." He just set his tool bag down and put his palms on the bench the way men pray when they don't know how. "You cut power?" he asked. I pointed at the breaker. He nodded. "Good. The other warning still stands." He looked from me to June and back. "Don't open that box alone." I almost laughed, the way you do when the same sentence drops from 3 mouths in one afternoon, hers, his, mine, and you realize it's not a rule, it's a rope. "We're waiting," I said, and this time it felt like a promise I could keep. Thunder lowed somewhere far off, like weather clearing its throat. The rafters creaked. A shadow moved across the workbench as a swallow, alive, not sketched, swept under the unpainted eave and cut a path through a square of light. It banked, flashed blue-black, and was gone. Have you ever watched a bird write your instructions in air? Gabe pulled a volt stick from his pocket and waved it near the stud bay. No glow. He said, "Dead. At least the dangerous kind." He glanced at the box and then at me. "Ready for the other kind?" I swallowed, the involuntary human kind, the word and the bird nested in my throat. My fingers found the edge of the lid and lifted an inch. The cassette recorder sat obediently where I'd stopped it. The envelopes waited like polite secrets. The brass key winked at its loop of red thread, patient and sure. Behind it all, tucked flat against the bottom, I saw one more thing I hadn't noticed before. A folded sketch in Naomi's line, precise, playful, labeled in the margins with her tiny notes. I didn't pull it free. Not yet. Not without my people. "Okay," I said, and the words sounded like a man stepping onto a bridge he didn't build alone. Outside, tires settled. Inside, light wavered like it was thinking about leaving and then decided to stay. And from somewhere invisible but close, the wall, the workbench, the place where the past sits when it still wants to help, I heard the smallest, cleanest sound. A click, like a hidden catch releasing, like something that had been waiting for the right number of hands.
Gabe wiped his hands on his jeans like he was about to touch something holy. He asked, "We good?" I looked at June. She nodded. Not brave, decided. There's a difference. I said together, and we lifted the lid like it might bite if we startled it. No cash, no jewels, just a nest the size of a heart. 3 envelopes bound with red thread, her block letters steady as ever.
Open with June. Open at the river. Open if you're ready. A tiny brass key looped on that same red thread like a pulse you can hold. A tiny cassette recorder, the cheap kind you buy in airport kiosks, with a label and Naomi's handwriting. Press play with someone. And under all them, a folded sketch in pencil. The title in the corner said Swallow, the way architects name houses that haven't been lived in yet. Have you ever felt the ground shift under your feet because the one thing you were sure would save you, money, a map, turns out to be paper and a voice? I wanted to be disappointed. Instead, my knees went weak with relief. Secrets that look like accusations are heavy. This looked like instructions. June lifted the recorder with both hands, thumbs nowhere near the buttons like it could detonate. With someone, she read, and glanced at me, then Gabe. I nodded. Gabe stepped back a pace, but he didn't leave. He knew the kind of silence we needed. June pressed play. A hiss, warm and living. Then, hey you. Not a ghost in my head. Naomi, breathing, smiling between words. I froze. Not fear, stopped by love you can hear. Have you ever had your name called by someone gone and felt your ribs try to learn a new shape? I swallowed hard. It hurt. If you're hearing this, she said, her voice going soft at the corners, you did the hard part. You opened the wall. You let light in. Thank you for not doing it alone. I swallowed hard. It hurt. I wanted to say this with my hands on your face, she went on, voice going soft at the corners, but life, it didn't set the clamps the way I hoped, so I tucked pieces of me in the places I knew you'd look last. A wet laugh. You, babe, you always look for strength first, not help. I winced. Gabe had the decency to study a knot in the workbench grain. June's fingers found the back of my arm, the way you hold a ladder so it'll hold you back. Naomi went on, lighter now, like she'd set down a heavy board. Do you remember our first spring? The birds in the eaves of the rental. You said they were swifts. I said swallows. We argued like people who don't think time is real yet. I could hear her grin. They're swallows. I win. I left you a map. The swallows will show you where to find me. Paper rustled on the tape, the sound of her turning a page in some room I don't get to see anymore. First one is where your hand always rests when you lean on the bench and pretend you're not tired. Under the front rail, left side. Feel for the inlay. It's small. Your fingers will know it's there before your brain does. Don't force it. Turn the eye. Together. Have you ever had a dead woman tell you exactly where your body remembers you? I didn't move. I couldn't. June did. She dropped to her knees and slid under the bench, ponytail sweeping the floor where sawdust had fossilized into little moons. Her hand skimmed the underside gently, learning the grain with the backs of her fingers, the way Naomi always did when she was listening to wood. I don't feel... Oh. Her voice changed shape. Dad, here. I crouched, old knees complaining like critics who don't build anything. My fingers found it before my eyes did, a shallow inlay, no bigger than a thumbnail, slick as oil from years of skin. I squinted. A swallow, carved so fine you'd miss it if you didn't love the person who carved it. I froze when I saw it. It wasn't just pretty, it was Naomi, her lines, her way of making small things feel like doors. The swallow's eye was a tiny brass dot, not a dot, a slotted screw sunk flush. My breath caught. Turn the eye, she'd said. Not poetry, a plan. Wait, I said, and June's hand paused on mine. We were both breathing too loud. Gabe crouched beside us, keeping his bulk back like a tree giving you shade without taking your light. Above our heads, the shop settled like a satisfied animal. On the tape, Naomi's voice smiled. There it is, she said, like she'd just watched us from a better seat. Good. Don't pull. Let it come to you. A A seam I'd never noticed in the front apron of the bench softened from shadow to line. Wood whispered against wood. A hidden drawer eased forward a breath, just enough to prove it was real, just enough to say, yes, keep going, then stopped. We didn't touch it, not yet. Some moments need a pause so your heart can catch up with your hands. Do you want me to... and let the sentence dangle like a clamp near the edge, ready if you need it, not if you don't. I put my palm flat against the underside of the bench Naomi had built with laughter and cursing and a splinter in her thumb she complained about for a week. We do this together, I said again, to June, to Gabe, to the woman in the tape who had already known I'd have to learn that twice. On 3, June whispered. I said 1, and the drawer waited like a held breath. 2, and my past loosened another quarter in my chest. 3. We reached for the hidden lip, 2 hands where one had always failed, and pulled.
The drawer slid forward on a whisper, the kind of sound wood makes when it's been waiting to be touched for a long time and finally forgives you. Have you ever felt a piece of furniture become a person for a second, like the bench itself exhaled? Inside wasn't neat. It was Naomi neat, order disguised as chaos. A black, soft-spined ledger the size of a paperback, edges freckled with sawdust. A muslin pouch tied with red thread, heavy like it held a handful of small storms. A stack of Polaroids, corners rounded from being thumbed, the top one showing Naomi in a bandana, grinning through a cloud of sawdust like joy was the tool. A single dried wildflower, pressed flat under wax paper, labeled in her tidy script, River, June 6th. And under those, a matte gray lockbox, palm-sized, with a keyhole that looked exactly the size of the brass key in the wall box. June sucked a breath in and didn't let it go right away. She hid a whole other room in a drawer, she whispered. Gabe let out a low whistle. Not surprise, respect. She knew her craft, he said, and then softer, she knew you. Muslin first, June said, already reaching like she'd been given an order and a gift at once. The pouch opened with a little sigh. Out poured a handful of metal that chinged, a carpenter's rosary, odd screws, a nickel with a notch cut in it, a brass token stamped with a swallow mid-turn, and the tiniest Allen key I've ever seen. Naomi was always tucking meaning into junk. The swallow token winked in the light, and for a heartbeat, it felt like the room nodded back. I picked up the Polaroids. My fingers shook in that way grief teaches them, like they remember heat before they feel it. First photo, Naomi, early 20s, standing proud beside a wobbly side table, her grin bigger than the project, Mr. Hollis from the thrift store beside her pointing at the leg like a man posing with his favorite joke. Back of the photo, first dovetail that made me swear. Second, a knot of teenage girls around a workbench, Naomi in the middle showing one how to set a chisel by feel. Back, Tuesday girls, charge them cookies. Third, the river bend, Willow leaning like an old man, our shadows long on the sand. Back, he said swifts, I said swallows, I win. A scribble smile. Have you ever had a stack of paper cut you and stitch you in the same motion? Pride and jealousy and love and a grief so bright that it made me squint all crowded my chest at once. June's hand hovered over the ledger. Do we, she asked. Careful, Gabe said, and I couldn't tell if he meant with our hands or our hearts. The ledger fell open to the middle, Naomi's block letters across the top, lark and swallow. Beneath, 2 columns, names on the left, numbers on the right. Not amounts I recognized, not invoices. Some had circles, some had a small carved bird doodle instead of a check mark. I read a few aloud, feeling like a thief in my own house. B. Carter, 6.5. M. Patel, 3. Hollis, 12 plus tools. The right-hand column didn't say dollars, no $sign anywhere, just numbers with little dots beside them. It looked like a scorecard or a countdown. My stomach turned anyway. Is that debt? I asked, dumb and scared at once. Was she lending money? Guilt snapped at my heels. We'd had nights with not thin dinners, nights I chose between prescriptions and groceries while Naomi pretended she wasn't hungry and pushed food across the table with her fork like a kid who hates peas. If she'd been giving money away while I was counting coupons, have you ever felt anger and shame rub together and spark, then realize you're holding the tinder? June read farther. There are notes, she said, tracing Naomi's side script. In O's hours, sanding. Promised Saturday, help, ladder. Bring soup to Mrs. A when it's cold. She blinked. These aren't dollars. Gabe tipped his head. Time, he said. Looks like a time bank. I wanted to believe him. I also wanted to close the book and pretend we never opened anything. Before my fear could build a better story than the truth, June put her finger on one entry and laughed a watery sound. Dad, 2 for complaining about sawdust in the laundry. Back half of me bristled, front half of me broke. She was keeping score, I said, voice scratchy, but in a language where we can win. The lockbox waited like a polite cough. The brass key in the wall box answered it without needing translation. I lifted the lid inside the drawer and set the box on the bench. It was heavier than it looked, the kind of heavy that feels like it could hold an hour if you asked it to. The key hung on its red thread between my fingers like a vein. The recorder sat nearest June's hand. She thumbed stop, then play again, as if Naomi could step back into the exact space between then and now and catch the rest of herself mid-sentence. If you made it to the drawer, Naomi said, warmer than before, like the microphone had warmed up on her breath, stop and breathe. The next part is heavy, but only if you try to lift it alone. I closed my eyes. Did she know how many times I'd tried to pick up an entire life with both hands because I didn't know you could ask someone to grab the other end? In the little gray box, she said, there are 3 letters, one for you, one for June, and one for us. You'll know which is which. Please don't read them in different rooms. She laughed, and it was exactly the sound she made the first time June tried to hammer a nail and put more arm than aim into it. The block notebook, if your brain is making it into something sharp, set it down. It's not what you think. It's a map of people who owe us time and care. Use it when you need to, not money, hands. She paused, and I could hear her sniff like she was trying not to cry. I hid this because I knew you, babe. I knew you'd try to be both of us. I needed to invent a way to make you ask for help. Have you ever been scolded so gently it feels like a hug? Shame and gratitude tangled up together and made my throat small. I slid the key into the lockbox. It turned easier than I deserved. Inside, a stack of envelopes nested like a trick box. On top, in Naomi's hand, 2 names, Dan and June. Below them, an envelope labeled with nothing but a pencil-burned swallow. The lines so light they looked like they might fly off the paper if you breathed too hard. The last one was banded with a strip of blue painter's tape that read, "Open together." I picked mine up. June picked hers. The weight was wrong for letters, heavier, like the paper had soaked up salt from a sea it had survived. I wanted to run to the other room and read it alone where my face could be a private thing. I also wanted to read it out loud with both of them close enough to catch me if my knees turned to water. I did what I always do when I don't know the right brave. I tried to split the difference. Maybe I'll scan mine first, I said, casual as a liar. Dad, June said, just my name, but all the meanings. Don't, run, be here. She slid her envelope back into the box like a woman who learned patience the hard way from 2 parents who loved her and one who had to leave. Mom said not to do this in different rooms, she said, eyes on the swallow envelope like it might whisper if she waited. Can we sit, like at the table? The workshop had a stool for Naomi, one for guests, and a stock of scrap that pretended to be a chair when she had too many kids in there to teach. I pulled the 2 stools close and sat. Gabe moved back a respectful foot and leaned against the door jamb, doing that electrician thing where you look like you belong while taking up as little air as possible. He was a witness. A switch flipped, one I didn't label, but it turned on anyway. I slid my finger under the flap of the envelope with my name on it. The glue gave with a quiet sigh like a secret tired of being lonely. June's breath mirrored mine without meaning to. The first line knocked me back a year. Hi, love.
You think you're ready for the way a pen can make a woman step through a locked door. You're not. I wasn't. I don't know if your hands are shaking, she wrote, but mine were when I wrote this. Not from fear, from wanting to get it right. If I could press these words into your chest and leave fingerprints, I would. She went on, apology woven with orders in a voice I'd have obeyed in a hurricane. I'm sorry for the lie of omission, she said, anticipating the part of me that weaponizes regret. Use this letter as a clamp to hold what matters while the glue sets. You never broke me by asking me to slow down. I just didn't know how to breathe any other way. That's why I'm asking you to build a new way with June, on purpose. Ask Gabe to fix the danger. Ask Hollis to show her that chisel trick I never got right. Use the ledger. It's a time bank. Cash it in without shame. I blinked at Gabe when I read his name. He looked at his boots like they'd told on him. Under the bench is more, she wrote. You probably found the Polaroids. Keep the girls' faces. They are my favorite invention. There's a blueprint at the bottom of the wall box called Swallow. Don't unfold it until you've gone to the river. Take June. Take a bag with snacks. You forget to eat when you're scared. June bumped my shoulder with hers. She knows you, she said, soft as a blanket. At the bottom of the page, a line I couldn't read out loud yet. You don't replace me by loving again. You honor me by loving at all. The words hit me like a shop light turning on, too bright, showing me things I wasn't ready to tidy at once. I put the letter down before it could do more work on me than I could handle in one sitting. My breath came back in stages. June rubbed her palms on her jeans. Mine? She asked. Now? I wanted to say no, to meter the pain like a prescription, one pill at a time, but Naomi had left dosage instructions. Together. June opened hers. She smiled at the first line, that same "Hi you" Naomi used on both of us like a family password. She read in little bursts, cheeks tilting up, then down, then steady. She wrote about the time I glued my hand to the birdhouse roof, she said, laughing with tears under it. And she told me not to sand away my mistakes so hard I lose the shape of the thing.
She swallowed. She said she left me a set of chisels. At the thrift store? With Mr. Hollis? Gabe made a small sound, not surprise, recognition. Hollis keeps everything in the back like a dragon, he said. If she told him to keep something for you, it's there with a sticky note and a sermon. The recorder clicked softly, the tape reaching its end of side A like a runner touching a wall. June flipped it, a move older than her hands, and pressed play again. Naomi's voice dropped into the room like she'd only been gone for the time it takes plastic to turn around. If you're holding the ledger and your brain is making you sick with money math, breathe. It's not dollars, it's hours, promises. People who said yes when I taught their kids to use a drill, and when I fixed their wobbly stairs, and when I sat with them in the waiting room after the test came back with a word they didn't want. Call them, cash in. They want to be part of this. She paused. I could hear paper again. And if you're looking at the envelope with the swallow on it and thinking you're not ready, that's fine. Put it back. There's no prize for speed. There is one for not doing it alone. I held the swallow envelope up to the light. Pencil lines barely there, like breath. My thumb traced the curve. My fear reached for the old script. Delay. Isolate. Fix. June read me faster than my own head. River first, she said, tapping the wildflower. She labeled it for us. Gabe cleared his throat. I should give you 2 space, he said, but his feet didn't move. He was the right kind of witness. Present, small, useful. I'll check the rafters, he added, pointing upward where I noticed for the first time that small wooden birds hid between the beams in shadows like shy guests at a party, their silhouettes familiar in a way that made my heart hiccup. Swallows. Dozens, maybe. Or maybe my eyes were inventing them because my brain finally had a word to paste over fear. I gathered the letters back into the lockbox like first aid you don't throw away when the bleeding slows. The ledger sat fatter on the bench now that it held meaning and not a monster. The Polaroids fanned out into a story. Girls, wood, river, light.
The wildflower lay between my fingers like proof of a day I almost forgot to remember. Then the lights flickered, 1, 2, a blink like a wink, and held. Gabe frowned at the subpanel. "Breaker labeled bench is off," he said, puzzled. He started to step toward the panel. June caught his sleeve, eyes on the recorder, as if it might speak again. It did. "One more thing," Naomi said, and even her recorded voice made me straighten like she'd walked in with sawdust in her hair and a plan I couldn't argue with. Gabe's eyebrows shot up. She labeled a breaker swallow? He scanned his blue tape notes. Outlets, lathe, bandsaw, bench. No swallow. He checked the main box on the wall by the door, more blue labels in his careful hand. At the very bottom, a fresh strip of tape I hadn't noticed before, not in his block letters, in Naomi's tidy script, tiny, like she leaned over someone's shoulder to add it when they weren't looking. Swallow. My hand went to the switch and stopped in midair, like you stop before turning on a light in a room you haven't been in since the night someone turned all the lights off for you. "We don't do this alone," I heard myself say, and I meant it as a rule, not a slogan. June's fingers slid into mine. Gabe stood to our side, not in front, not behind. A swallow, real, alive, cut a dark arc past the window, then was gone. "On 3, June said. "1, I answered, breath stuttering once. "2, she said, squeezing my hand like a clamp holds wood while the glue learns how to be strong. "3, I said, and reached for the breaker her handwriting had named.
3, I said, and flipped the breaker with Naomi's handwriting on it. Nothing exploded, no buzz, no pop, just a small pause, like the room inhaled. Then a hush of warm light woke up along the rafters. Tiny bulbs Naomi must have tucked into the beams years ago, hidden under the lip of the joists so they washed the walls in honey instead of stabbing your eyes. Have you ever watched a room you thought you knew blink its eyes open and look back at you? Gabe whispered, "Well, I'll be..." and didn't finish. June's hand squeezed me like she was making sure this was real and not something the grief part of my brain had invented to be kind for once. The glow slid across corners I'd always let myself look at, and it landed on the far wall, on a panel I'd always assumed was just a patch of plywood Naomi never got around to painting. In the new light, lines appeared where I'd sworn there were none. Shadows turned into edges. What I thought was a scuff was a seam. Then, like the bench drawer, something answered us, a magnet's soft surrender. A panel eased proud of the wall by the width of a fingernail. We didn't touch it, not yet. The light did the work. It spilled over gallery that had been hiding in plain sight. Dozens of small wooden birds, each carved and sanded and oiled until the green looked like wind. Swallows, curved backs, forked tails, mid-turn. They lined the panel, tucked into little ledges and perches Naomi had burned into the wood with a steady hand. And on the breast of each bird, a name. Not just anyone's names. Names like prayers you say when the lights are off. "Mr. Hollis," June said, reaching toward one and stopping a millimeter short like her finger had found a temperature change. "Mrs. Patel, Miguel, B. Carter." Names from the ledger, from our street, from Tuesdays with cookies, from the old plant, from years I didn't know she was collecting people like tools you share because they're safer together. Then mine. Dan, burned crisp into the chest of a bird that looked like it had been held 1,000 times. Beside it, June. The letters weren't fancy, just true. Have you ever seen your own name in wood and felt your bones remember you're not made of paper? Gabe cleared his throat. "No way," he said softly, half a laugh, half a vow. His name was there too, tucked near the bottom like he was trying not to take up space even in a shrine he didn't know he'd been given. In the center of the panel, framed in a simple rectangle of maple with corners so clean they looked like kindness, Naomi had burned words into the wood grain as if the wall itself needed a motto to hold its shape. "Don't open that box alone." I froze. Not the panic kind. The kind where the part of you that's always running finally sits down because someone laid a bench with your name on it. Have you ever felt seen by a room? The cassette gave a little tick. The the way tape does when it rolls past a splice, and Naomi's voice slid back into the light like she was waiting for the glow to find our faces. "If you can see the birds," she said, softer than before, "you're exactly where I hoped you'd be." Gabe actually looked up at the rafters like he could see her perched there. June leaned in, eyes bright and wet and steady. "I carved you a flock," she said, laughing a little at her own audacity. "Every person who owed us a Tuesday or a soup or a hammer swing, I made them into a bird so you'd remember who to call when your roof leaks and your heart does too." Paper rustled in the recorder, her turning a page in some place I can only reach by listening. "You two are in the middle because that's where you've always been, even when you thought you were on the edges." There was a pause. I could hear her draw a breath. "Dan," she said, and everything in me answered to my name the way it did the first time she said it with sawdust stuck to her lip. "Your biggest fear is failing her, failing June. I know. You think if you ask for help, you prove that fear right. That's a lie we learned from people who didn't know better. Asking is the only way to pass the tool across the bench without dropping it." "June," she went on, her voice changing shape like she moved her head, like she was looking at our daughter right then from a good angle. "Your biggest fear is laughing means forgetting. It doesn't. Laughter is how the birds find each other in a storm." The lights warmed another shade. The birds' bellies glowed like a sunset was caught in the grain. Gabe wiped at his cheek with the back of his wrist the way men do when they pretend to have sawdust in their eyes. "She wired this to low voltage," he murmured, half to himself, half to us, independent of the bench. "That flicker earlier? Probably a little timer waking up a relay. Smart." "Of course she did," I said and smiled without meaning to. Naomi never trusted a single point of failure, electric or human. The tape clicked again, like a finger topping the page to pull our eyes back. "There's one more thing in the wall box," she said, her tone doing that thing where it got playful when she knew she was being dossy. "A drawing called Swallow. Don't unfold it until you've gone to the river. I need you to move your bodies before you move your brains. Take snacks. Dan, you forget to eat when you're scared." I could hear her grin. "And flip the swallow breaker off when you leave. The birds don't need to burn if you're not in the room." The recorder whirred on a breath longer than it needed to, like it wanted to sit with us. Then it clicked off. Side B done. Silence, but not empty. The kind that holds your back up. We stood there for a minute that might have been an hour. The three of us, a flock on a wall. The sentence at the center of our story burned into wood like it had always lived there. Gabe exhaled, a sound that ended in a quiet little laugh. "She left you a community with an on switch," he said. "I've never seen grief wired better." June blew out a breath that sounded like a kid letting go of a math problem and letting the answer be what it is. "We have to go to the river," she said, already moving to gather the envelopes and the wildflower and the muslin pouch like a woman packing light for a long walk. I reached to turn the breaker off, my fingers hesitating a second longer than necessary because a selfish part of me wanted to stand in that light forever and never have to test whether it could live in my head when the switch went dark. "Hold up," Gabe said, and stepped closer to the panel with the birds. He topped the frame lightly, then slid a calloused finger under a corner detail I'd missed. Of course I did. Sometimes love blinds you to the clever parts. A tiny drawer kissed out from the bottom edge, no bigger than a matchbox. He handed it to me like a ticket. Naomi's script, small but sure. "If you're here before the river, put this back." I laughed, actually laughed, because she'd outmaneuvered me from the other side of a year. I slid the note back where it belonged. "Okay," I said to the panel, to the room, to the way forward she had arranged. At the door, I flipped the breaker labeled Swallow off. The lights dimmed like eyelets, not like a cut. The birds faded to silhouettes again, and somehow they felt more present in the dark because I knew their names now. Have you ever learned a map so well you can walk it blind and still see? We carried the box between us, June with one handle, me with the other, like pallbearers for something that wasn't dying, just changing shape. Gabe opened the door and stood aside. "You want company at the river?" he asked, not pushing, not stepping back either. I looked at June. Her chin tipped up a fraction like Naomi's did when she was about to try something that mattered. "Come," she said to Gabe, and to me, and to whatever was listening. "Mom said don't do it alone."
We crossed the yard with the sky thinking about rain and the smell of cut grass and lemon oil sticking to us like a benediction. At the gate, I turned back once. The workshop sat quiet, switched off, but I swear I could feel the birds in there like a low hum the world makes when it's lined up just right. The panel's motto lived in the doorway behind my eyes. Don't open that box alone. We didn't, and the next thing Naomi asked of us was waiting where the river curled around the old willow like a hand, where a metal can the color of old storms sat a few inches under the dirt, and where the envelope open at the river would teach us how to let some things float away without losing what keeps you.
The river had that late afternoon color that makes everything honest. Have you ever stood where water curves around a memory and felt your chest do the same? The willow leaned over the bend like a hand cupped to hear us better. We set the box down in the grass. June tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and touched the envelope with "Open at the River" written in Naomi's printing like a dare and a lullaby. "Here?" she asked. "Here," I said. She slid a finger under the flop. The paper gave with a sound that felt like a nod. Inside, Naomi's voice in ink. "Hi, you two. Sit. Breathe. If you're here, you followed the first swallow. Good. The second one lives by the willow. I buried an old can under the curved root that looks like a question mark. Use the nickel, the one with the notch." June's eyes flicked to the muslin pouch we'd brought. She fished out the notched nickel and held it up like a coin trick, for once not for money. Gabe crouched by the root, fingers probing the damp soil. His hand hit metal with a solid clink that made my heart jump like it remembered how to be surprised without bracing for bad news. We scraped back earth. A rust-scabbed ammo can winked up at us, a slotted fastener set in the lid. June fit the notched nickel into the slot and turned. It resisted, then yielded with a wet sigh. Have you ever felt a lock admit it was only pretending to be stronger than it was? Inside, a packet of wildflower seeds taped to the underside of the lid, a short mason jar half filled with fine sawdust, a fat carpenter's pencil wrapped with blue tape, and a small tin the size of a sandwich that wore a swallow stamped on its lid like a family crest, also locked. June's face went soft, like a light under a lampshade. She unfolded Naomi's letter further. "Pick 3 stones," Naomi had written. "Flat if you can, ugly if you can't. Write on them. Not pretty words, true ones. The heavy ones you don't say out loud because you're busy holding everyone else's breath." She drew a little map in the margin. 3 stones, 3 arcs into the current. The pencil felt familiar in my hand, like the ones Naomi tucked behind her ear. I picked a stone ugly enough to suit me. I didn't think. I wrote the first sentence I haven't let myself say out loud in a year. "I couldn't save you." The letters wobbled. June watched and didn't flinch. She wrote on her own rock, hand steady, mouth stubborn. She held it out so I could see. "I'm scared I'll forget your laugh." Gabe stared at his blank rock like it had something to say to him in return. He printed small, "I'm scared to go home to an empty place." He looked almost embarrassed, like he'd borrowed the ritual and didn't know if he had the right currency. June nodded once, a queen knighting a subject. "Throw," she said. We took turns. The river took them like a parent takes crumpled papers from a child. No judgment, just hands. The stones slipped under, then surfaced, then dove again. The current was stronger than I remembered. Have you ever watched water argue with weight and realized they're both part of the same truth? Naomi's letter had more. Plant the seeds at the base of the willow, even if it's the wrong season. Trust that some things bloom off schedule. Water them with a handful of sawdust. I know that's not how watering works. Do it anyway. It's for your hands, not the ground. We made a small trench with our fingers, unscientific, full of faith. June shook the seeds like salt. I poured the sawdust and it fell in a golden ribbon and stuck to the dirt in a way that made the river look like it was choking up. Gabe brought water in his cupped palm and drizzled it like a man relearning ritual. The willow creaked. A bird cut through the air above us, quick as an idea. "Last thing," Naomi had written. "Inside the tin with the swallow on it is a thing you'll want. Leave it locked, for now. You don't have the key you need yet." That's not a metaphor. Okay, it's also a metaphor.
If you try your brass key, it won't fit. Don't file it, don't force it. Put the tin back in the can. Kiss the lid. Yes, I'm bossy. Of course we tried the brass key. Of course it didn't fit. It was almost comical how wrong it was, just enough smaller to insult you. I caught June's smile tilting up as even her eyes shone. She really knows you, she said to me, because she knows me. I would have forced it, filed it, convinced myself making the wrong key right was a form of love. Gabe slid the tin back into the can like tucking in a child. I kissed the lid because instructions are instructions. June did too. A quick press like she was practicing letting go before she had to do it for real. We buried it again. Hands dirty, small crescent moons of soil pushed under nails. Naomi's last river line was small, as if she'd had to make it small to write it. If you can, laugh. That would be my favorite sound here. We laughed. It came out wrong at first, the way a chord sounds bad until everyone finds their note. Then it settled. The river took the echo and made it belong to itself, which somehow made it more ours. We packed up. June slid the wildflower packet into her back pocket like an IOU. I put the mason jar of sawdust back in the box, a reliquary of ordinary good. The envelope labeled "Open if you're ready" shifted in the lockbox as I closed the lid. It felt like a pulse. I pretended I didn't feel it. Thrift store, June said, as if the path was obvious and always had been. Mr. Hollis's place smells like old radios, lemon oil, and the kind of dust that earns its keep. He's got a counter that's seen more deals than weddings, a bell on the door that lies and makes you think time is cute. He looked up when we came in and his face did two things at once, young and old. "Well, look what the swallows brought," he said, and then pretended he hadn't just said the exact word that had been running our day. "You too hungry? I got mints." June blurted it because sometimes 16 is honesty with no coat. "Mom said you have something for me." He didn't blink. He leaned under the counter and pulled out a shallow drawer I hadn't noticed before. Oak, dovetailed like a geometry lesson with a good punchline. A brass tag burned into the front read "Lark and Swallow." He set it on the glass like a crown that's seen some wars. Inside, wrapped in brown paper and tied with red thread, lay a set of chisels whose handles had the color of tea left too long. Blue painter's tape circled each ferrule, and on it Naomi's small print. "For June. Keep your fingers behind the line. Love, Mom." Mr. Hollis's big carpenter hands shook as he set them down in front of her like an offering he'd had to guard against dragons and dust. "She told me to keep these till you ask nice," he said, smile crumpling at the edges. "Said you'd know when." He looked at me and then away, the way men do when they could cry and would rather borrow your pride than show you theirs. June touched the chisels with the backs of her hands, as Naomi had taught her to introduce herself to wood. Her eyes filled like a slow cup. "They're heavy," she said. "Good." Mr. Hollis nodded. "Good weight means they stay where you put them," he said. "You keep the stones honest, they'll give you back what you give them." He looked past us at the door like he was waiting for one more thing to walk in with the wind. "And she told me to show you this," he said, jerking his chin towards a pegboard that didn't look like much until you knew what language it spoke. A card pinned to the side in Naomi's hand, "Tuesday girls, ask Mr. H for the good clamps." Under it, photos of teenagers I didn't know I knew, all holding up wooden things like trophies and grins like they were in on a secret. He tapped the edge of the board with a knuckle. "Ledger in your pocket make you nervous?" he asked without looking. I nodded before my mouth got there. "It's not debt," he said, like he'd been waiting to absolve me for months. "It's a circle. You call, they show. They call, you show. That's all a town is when it's good." He slid a dog-eared index card across the counter, names and numbers in Naomi's block letters, double underlined where she knew I'd try to tell myself I was imposing. "He keeps a Saturday crew for her," he said. "Haven't known where to aim them since she, his voice stuttered like an old engine catching. "Say the word and we'll bring ladders and casseroles and sappy stories you'll pretend you don't want." "Saturday," I said, before my fear could steal my mouth. He beamed like a camp counselor who just assigned me a bunk. Saturday, he repeated. He reached under the counter again and came up with a folded apron, the kind with 1,000 pockets that all acquire a purpose the moment you tie the thing on. She left you this, too, he said, handing it to me, said you'd need something to keep your hands where your heart can see them. The shop bell lied again, and a woman with a box of records came in, and the world pretended it was regular for a second. We took the chisels. Mr. Hollis walked us to the door like it was a cliff and patted the frame. Birds always find the wire, he said. Don't worry about looking pretty. Worry about showing up. In the truck, the chisels rode in June's lap like sleeping cats. She kept touching the blue tape, a little ritual that looked like counting. I could feel that third envelope in the lockbox at my feet, the swallow sketched so lightly it might fly off. It felt heavier now that we'd done what it asked us to do first. Tonight, June said, not a threat, a plan. We opened the other one, with Gabe. I wanted to put it off. I also wanted to stop being the kind of man who confuses postponing pain with protecting people. At a red light, I caught myself in the rear view. I looked older than my age and younger than yesterday. Have you ever realized a warning, don't open that box alone, is less a rule and more a way home? When we turned onto our street, Mrs. Patel was watering her flowers, her phone in her pocket like a peace offering. She waved, I waved back in a way that felt more than neighborly. It felt like practice. The workshop sat quiet, a dark square at the edge of the yard that didn't scare me for once. The birds on the wall waited with their eyes closed, trusting I'd flip their light back on when it mattered.
We carried the box in together. Gabe met us at the door because he'd been on the porch like a guard dog who doesn't bark. He nodded at the chisels, at the dirt under our nails, at the way our shoulders sat lower. "River work done?" he asked. "River work started," I said. We set the lockbox on the bench between us. The envelope with the swallow drew the room's attention without moving. The recorder sat nearby, a small plastic chest that had already proven it could hold a life. The ledger lay open to lark and swallow like a door with a rock in it so it won't slam shut. I put my hand flat on the workbench. June's slid on mine. Gabe's knuckles rested near the corner, close but not crowding. The lights didn't flicker this time. They didn't have to. We were the switch. "Okay," I said, and I don't know if I said it to the room, to Naomi, to the swallow on the paper, or to the part of me that finally believed the motto on the wall. Together. We set the lockbox on the bench like a small, tame animal that could still bite. The envelope with the swallow sketched on it at the top, blue painter's tape across the flop in Naomi's neat hand. Open together. My thumb hovered. Have you ever stared at a line that knows exactly where your courage stops? June slid her fingers under the tape and peeled it slow like it would scream if she ripped. It didn't. It sighed. She glanced at me. "Ready?" she asked. Ready is a word that looks brave from far away. "Together," I said. She unfolded the letter. "Hi, you two." Her handwriting hit me in the ribs the way a smell can time travel. Naomi's voice lived in the lines, even on paper. "Dan," she wrote. Saying my name on paper still made my bones answer. "Your fear is failing her. The way men like you were trained that asking means failing. Please hear me. You don't replace me by loving again. You honor me by loving it all. I'm not a chair you keep empty. I'm a joinery you take everywhere. If a good woman sits at your table someday, let June teach her the swallow sign. I mean it." It split me and stitched me in the same breath. Gabe looked at the floor with the stubborn interest of a man who's trying to be a wall when the room turns holy. June reached for my hand without looking and squeezed like a clamp set just right. "And June," she wrote, "you keep trying to sand your edges until you disappear. Stop. Your laugh is a tool. Use it. Let your dad be messy. He's not broken. He's learning new joinery." June huffed a laugh that squeaked and bit her lip like she could put it back. She couldn't. That was the point. At the bottom, a line that looked like Naomi had to make herself small to fit it on the page. "Last thing. Don't open that box alone started as safety and became a rule for our hearts. I fainted once out here during treatment. No drama,
just down, like a marionette snipped. I woke up staring at the underside of this bench and realized I'd built a life where falling alone was possible. Promise me you won't be alone with the heavy boxes, any of them. The room moved. Maybe just my breath, maybe all of us. Okay, the letter ended. Now, bird's drawer, then unfold swallow, then call Hollis and say Saturday. I love you in pieces and all at once. We stood in that letter light for a beat that felt like a warm hand on the back of my neck. Then June wiped her cheeks with the heel of her hand like she was shoving herself back into her skin. Drawer, she said. I flipped the swallow breaker on. Honeyed light woke the rafters and found the flock again, names glowing like coals. I slid a finger under the tiny reveal at the base of the frame and eased the little drawer out. Inside, the matchbox-sized folded note I'd seen earlier, and beneath it, a key so small that it had to be important. An old skeleton key, brass gone warm with thumb oil, tied with a thread the color of Naomi's favorite bandana. I opened the little note. Naomi's script again, smug and kind. If you're reading this after the river, gold star. This key fits the tin by the willow. Go in daylight, take water and a cookie. Don't make me come down there. Gabe snorted. She clocked you good, he said, and reached into his pocket. He set a butterscotch on the bench like he was making change. It's not a cookie, but it's sugar. I tucked the tiny key into my palm, then into my short pocket like a heartbeat. It made a tiny weight I didn't know I needed. June pointed at the wall box under the pegboard, the folded plan we'd been avoiding since hour one. Swallow, she said. The word had changed shape for me across a day. Bird, instruction, promise. I lifted the folded paper, careful with the brittle edges that come with time sits too long. We unfolded it together. Not a blueprint. Naomi never pretended to be an architect. A shop drawing in pencil and humor. Elevation and end view, mortise dimensions scribbled with arrows. In the corner, she'd written swallow bench and drawn a tiny bird turning on a dime. Notes crowded the margins in her small print. 2 clamps minimum, 4 if you don't like swearing. Cut your tenons fat. Regret is easier to shave than to glue back. These rails want 2 hands to hold it square. Ask. If you mess up, write it under the bench so some future woman can laugh kindly at you. Carve 2 small swallows on the front apron when you're done. Names on their chests. Add more when you need more people. And then, at the bottom, the line that she'd already burned into the wall, written one more place for when the lights were off. Don't open that box alone. I laughed. I cried. I did that thing you inhale and it turns into a sound you don't admit to at the hardware store. Have you ever seen a plan and realized it's not for wood at all? Saturday, I said, the word showing up in my mouth before my fear could tell it to come back later. I pulled the ledger over and put my finger down on the first name with a bird burned beside it. B. Carter, 6.5. I dialed, it went to voicemail, and I left a message that sounded like a person asking for sugar, not blood. Hey, it's Dan, Naomi's husband. She left us a map. We're building a bench on Saturday. She said you owe us sanding hours. I think we owe you soup. Come if you can. Bring a story. I hung up and felt something recalibrate in my chest, a click faint and perfect as the click under the bench when the swallow's eye turned. June texted Mr. Hollis. He replied in 10 seconds. I keep the good clamps in the back. Saturday. Gabe nudged the butterscotch toward me. Daylight's done, he said, nodding towards the window where the yard was turning the color of ash. Everything father and me wanted to go now, headlamp and stubbornness, some romantic gesture against a locked evening. Naomi's note, go in daylight, take water and a cookie. I left the butterscotch on the bench like an oath to obey. We flipped the swallow breaker off. The birds dimmed like they were blinking slow and content. June gathered the letters back into the lockbox, gentler than she used to put dolls to bed. At the door, I touched the key in my pocket like a worry stone. My thumb found the thread, smooth from her tying it. Have you ever slept with a key under your ribs and felt like a house? We turned out the last light, stepped into the almost night, and let the workshop settle. Tomorrow, daylight, the willow. The little tin in the ground with a bird stamped in its lid and a secret inside. The key that fits it against my heart. And one more thing I didn't plan. Somewhere past midnight, after the house learned our new breathing, I swear I heard the cassette in the locked box click once. Just a tiny, polite tap, like a good night from a room we'd switch back on when the sun came up.
Morning came with that clean kind of light that makes liars out of excuses. June made us pack like we were going somewhere far. Water bottles, 2 oatmeal cookies, the tiny skeleton key in my shirt pocket where a heartbeat belongs. Gabe met us at the gate with a thermos and the way a man stands when he's been invited to family business and knows how to be useful without being in the way. "Daylight?" he asked. "Daylight," I said, and patted the key through cotton, small and certain. At the Willow, the dirt gave easier than it had last night, as if the ground had been loosening its grip for us in our sleep. We unearthed the ammo can. The lid winked. The swallow tin inside looked almost smug, stamped bird catching sun like it had an opinion. I took out the skeleton key. It was ridiculous, too delicate for a man's hands if you believe the wrong stories. I slipped it into the lock. It seated like it had been waiting for this exact angle since the day Naomi slid the tin into the can. A half turn, the tiniest catch, then a soft give that felt like an apology and a permission at once. Have you ever opened something small and felt a room get bigger? Inside, folded felt, a paper swaddle protecting little lives. On top, a note in Naomi's hand, just 4 words. Under the birds, dusk. Beneath that, a second audio cassette, its cheap plastic almost laughing at how much weight it was about to carry. Across the label in her block letters, "If you're ready." My throat tightened like a vice had kissed it. There were 2 more things tucked under the tape. Her wedding ring, scuffed to a soft shine from years of kissing wood, looped through a tiny brass swallow pendant strung on red thread. And a strip of sandpaper with 220 penciled in her small script, the grit worn at the edges like she'd palmed it while she thought. June touched the pendant first, then the ring, then my wrist. "She wants us to wear it," she whispered, not asking. The red thread slid cool over my skin as I tied the swallow around June's neck with fingers that fumbled only once. I held the ring and felt the exact circumference of 10,000 days. Have you ever realized your hand remembers a weight even when your head insisted it forgot? We put everything back like nurses who know how to dress wounds. Cassette in my pocket, felt rewrapped, tin nested, lid kissed because instruction is instruction. We replanted the can with the same care we used digging it up. June pressed dirt down in little pats like a baker smoothing icing. On the way home, my phone began to trill with texts, names from the ledger returning the favor time was keeping. Saturday works. I've got clamps. Soup, 2 kinds. Tell June I'm bringing extra chisels and a Band-Aid tin. The good kind of notification, sound that meant hands. We stepped into the workshop and it felt less like a shrine and more like a room that had been cleared for guests. I flipped the swallow breaker. Warm lights woke our flock. The birds glowed like coals coaxed back by breath. The panel's sentence held the room together. "Don't open that box alone." "Dusk," June said, glancing at the window where the sky was bluing towards evening. "We wait." Waiting is a discipline I've never been graded well in. I wanted to press play and make the ache shut up. Instead, we prepped. Gabe checked the outlets like a man rehearsing a speech in a language he already speaks. June laid out the chisels Mr. Hollis had saved like saints in a line. I sharpened a pencil because it's what I know how to do when I have to wait for something bigger than my hands. Dusk came greedy and generous, swallowing the yard and handing the room back to us in honey and shadow. We set the recorder on the bench under the birds. June's thumb hovered. Gabe stepped closer, then stepped closer. A man not wanting to crowd the holy and not wanting to miss it either. "Together?" June said. "Together," I breathed and nodded at the little rectangle that had been holding sentences hostage. She pressed play. The hiss arrived first, the lovely analog one that sounds like rain on a better day. Then her.
If you kept the promise, Naomi said, low and smiling. She always sounded like that in the evening, softened at the edges. Then I'm talking to all of you, and the birds. Hi, you. Hi, June. Hi, person in the doorway trying to decide if he belongs. Gabe flushed and looked down. She laughed like she could see him. You belong. My knees weren't sure whether to stand or lock. I leaned on the bench the way I always do when the world asks me to carry something that isn't a 2x4. Here's what I'm scared of, she said, and the words landed like kind nails. I'm scared you'll think taking me off your finger means taking me out of your life. A tiny laugh. So I built you a better ritual. Tie my ring to the swallow necklace for as long as that makes sense. When it doesn't, put it on the new bench in the little dish I didn't make yet, and let some other part of me hold you while you work. June's fingers found the pendant at her throat and smoothed it like a feather. Dan, she said, and my name was a tool she knew how to use. You think being strong means being alone. That isn't strong, that's just heavy. Flip the breaker labeled ask when you forget. I choked on a laugh. She went on. You trained yourself to measure love in what you can lift. Learn to measure it in who shows up when you stop lifting. I looked at Gabe, I looked at June, I looked at the ledger. Every name in the room looked back. June, baby, she said next. You think you have to be perfect to make the sound come out right. You don't. Make the sound. Make the cut. Sand only enough to keep your blood inside your skin. Leave the rest so we know you did it. Your laughter is a saw that doesn't split the grain. It's how the birds find each other. I've never wanted to hold a sound like I wanted to catch that line and live inside it. She paused. The room made its own noises, rafters stretching, someone's sleeve swishing. The tape clicked once, then gave us the part I didn't know I needed and the part I'd been ducking. I fainted here once, she said plainly. No drama, like I told you in the letter. Just down, like a marionette snipped. I woke up under the bench, looking up at the drawer I'd built with my own stubborn hands, and realized the worst thing wasn't being sick. It was that I could disappear in this room and you wouldn't find me till later. That's when I started building these stupid little swallows and hassling Hollis and lying to you about how tired I was so you'd let me have one more Tuesday with the girls. That's when I wrote, "Don't open that box alone" on the back of a board and pretended it was about electricity, so I didn't have to admit it was about us. The tape hiccuped. I pressed my palm flat against the bench. The wood under my skin felt like a live animal, like a thing that had been keeping secrets for me because I asked it to, not because it wanted to. Have you ever put your hand on the past and felt it say, "Okay, but now what?" Naomi's voice studied. "Build the bench," she said. "Put it where sunlight hits in the morning. Put our names on the front swallows. Add more names when you need more people. Call Saturday what it is. Proof. Eat the soup people bring even if it's too salty. It's a love language. Don't clean the room too much after. Let the mess tell you we were here." Her breath made a little click near the microphone like she had leaned in to kiss it and then thought better of it. "Last thing," she said, quiet, so we leaned closer like kids at a campfire. "I love you, in pieces and all at once. You can keep carrying me if you carry me like this, birds, bench, and hands, not boxes alone." The cassette motor whirred a little, the way old motors do when they hit the end of the ribbon and want a few more syllables before they admit they're done. Then a soft click, then the smallest aftersound. Tape settling, plastic remembering its shape, the universe deciding to let us have a minute without instruction. We stood there, 3 people under a family of birds, and let dusk decide who we were going to be. My phone buzzed and didn't stop. It wasn't a rudeness, it was an answer, a thread from Mr. Hollis. I told the Tuesday girls, and they told their dads, and now you've got a situation. Photos followed. Planks in truck beds, clamps like bouquets, a pot the size of a tire full of something red and comforting, a teen girl in a sawdust-streaked hoodie holding up a cardboard sign that read, "We owe ours," with a tiny bird doodled in the corner. June grinned like a confession. Gabe laughed like a man who just watched a breaker flip that had been mislabeled for years. The birds on the wall didn't blink. They didn't need to. The room had enough light now to keep us until morning. Tomorrow, I said, not to end the moment, but to walk it forward. Tomorrow, June echoed, the pendant cold and sure against her collarbone. Gabe picked up a broom and set it back down, like a man teaching himself the shape of being part of a thing. I'll bring donuts, he said, and a sander, and whatever else. We turned the swallow breaker off and the flock faded slow, not gone, just resting. The motto in the center stayed in my vision even in the dark, like real words do. Don't open that box alone. The last thing I did before we left the room was slip Naomi's ring on the red thread with the swallow and tie a knot that would hold until it didn't have to. It tapped once against the pendant, a bright, polite sound like a door knocked by someone who lives here. We slept like people who had work to do and someone to do it with. And in the morning, Saturday, the gravel filled with tires and laughter and casseroles and clamps, and the blueprint called Swallow went from pencil to wood, and the ledger turned from a list into a line of bodies on a porch. But that's the next part. That's the part where we stop keeping a museum and start building a life.
Saturday didn't creep in, it backed a truck up my driveway. Have you ever opened your front door and realized your grief sent invitations while you slept? By 9 a.m., the yard was full of people and noise that didn't ask permission. Mr. Hollis arrived first with a crate of clamps like a florist with steel flowers. Behind him, two of the Tuesday girls, now seniors, taller than their old photos, hauled a shop vac and a playlist. Mrs. Patel came with a pot that smelled like cinnamon and tomatoes and every good decision I've never made on time. McGill from the plant jogged up with a framing square and a shy wave. B. Carter, whoever he'd been in Naomi's ledger, showed with a random orbital sander and the confidence of a man who knows his way around circles. And Gabe, he rolled in a new spool of 12-gauge and half a dozen extension cords and planted himself where he could be useful and not in the way, a talent that should win awards. The bench plan, Swallow, sat on the workbench under the flock, corners paned with clamps and a donut, like paper needs gravity when the wind of people moves through a room. "Where do you want it?" Mr. Hollis asked, clapping his hands together like a referee. I pointed to the spot Naomi instructed in pencil, where the morning light hits. A rectangle of sun warmed the concrete like the room had already saved the place for it. We read her notes out loud as a congregation. 2 clamps minimum. Cut your tenons fat. Regret is easier to shave than to glue back. The girls cackled and wrote that one on the whiteboard like scripture. June tied on her new apron, pocket swallowing tools like it had been waiting for this, and rolled her shoulders like a pitcher on opening day. "First cut is yours," I told her, and meant more than wood. She set her chisel on a knife line Naomi had sketched on the plan and glanced up at the birds. "Leave these tool marks on purpose," read a margin note. June breathed once, found the angle, and cut. The chisel sang, the grain answered, a curl of maple lifted and fell like a ribbon finally landing. Have you ever heard a sound make a room decide what it's for? We set the legs, mortise to the aprons, cut those tenons fat like Naomi begged us to. Mr. Hollis showed June the trick he promised, the wrist roll that seats a chisel without chewing my shoulder. She caught it in 3 tries, and he clucked like a proud hen. I blew one cut on the back rail, half a curve too wide, and my body moved to hide it the way old habits hide their faces. June caught my wrist. "Mom said write it under the bench," she reminded, a smile sideways and merciful. We all laughed, not at the mistake, but at the permission. I grabbed a Sharpie and crawled under. In Naomi's museum, I wouldn't have dared. In Naomi's workshop Reborn, I wrote, "Dad forgot to measure the fat tenon skinny," and drew an arrow. Mr. Hollis added, "We've all glued regret," and initialed it like a graffitied pew. By midday, the shop had a weather system of its own. Laughter and sawdust, soup steam, the high, clean ring of a mallet setting a pin. People rotated in like a barn raising. Names from the ledger crossed the yard under their own power. 6.5 hours turned into a teenager wiping sweat with her sleeve and asking where to stack offcuts. 12 plus tools turned into Mr. Hollis fishing 2 perfect oak pegs out of his pocket like a magic trick. Every time someone new arrived, June or I pointed up at the flock and found their name in the birds. Watching their faces when they saw their names carved there, have you ever watched a person recognize they were loved in advance? Gabe hovered near the subpanel, but he wasn't babysitting the breakers anymore. He was refilling coffee, catching falling clamps, handing me a square before I knew I needed it. When the room's hum dipped, he deadpanned, "We're at 2 clamps, I can feel it in my fillings," and someone fetched 2 more just to satisfy the joke. We set the top last, the heavy part. 4 of us lifted, 6 hands under Maple, my palm finding June's at the corner. "Ask," I heard Naomi say from a place beyond tape. We asked. They came. We set it down with the smallest thud. Clean, square, inevitable. "Moment of truth," Mr. Hollis said, and rapped the bench with his knuckles. It answered like good wood does. One sound, clear. June's eyes were bright and fierce, her mouth a determined line that couldn't decide whether to smile or shake. I put my hand in the center. She put hers on mine. We pressed. The bench didn't rock, not a hair. It wasn't pretty, it was perfect. We flipped the swallow breaker, the birds woke and watched. The motto burned into their panel looked less like a warning now, more like a benediction. "Don't open that box alone." "Front apron," June said, already laying out the tiny swallows Naomi asked us to carve. She drew the shape light and sure. 2 small birds in flight, one labeled with a soft pencil D, the other J. "Names on their chests," I read, and my voice warped around the edges because that kind of instruction is never just about letters. We carved slow, one shallow pass at a time, relief cuts like breath. When the birds took shape, we burned our names into them with Mr. Hollis's wood burner. Awkward, steady, true. He showed us how to lean the tip so the lines pulled dark and crisp without tearing the grain. The Tuesday girls cheered and pretended not to wipe their eyes. B. Carter raised his donut like a toast. Gabe smiled into his coffee like a man who knows electricity and love work best when grounded. "Add more when you need more people," Naomi wrote in the margin. June reached for the pencil again. "Who?" she asked, looking at me, at the room, at the panel of birds already full of names. I thought of Naomi's rule that she wasn't a chair we keep empty. I thought of Naomi's ring in my pocket on the red thread, waiting for a new ritual. I thought of women I don't know yet, and the man I still get to become. "Not today," I said gently. "Today's for us. Tomorrow can hold more." We made the dish Naomi teased us for not having. It felt right. It should be our first project on the new bench. A little offcut of walnut, hollowed with a gouge, edges burnished with shavings till it shone. June carved a swallow in the center, tiny enough you had to turn the dish to catch it. I looped Naomi's ring on the red thread with the brass swallow pendant and set it in the bowl. It clinked, a small, polite sound, the kind that stands straight but doesn't shout. Have you ever placed something down and felt a piece of oxygen return to the room? We ate soup with shop spoons and paper bowls. Someone brought bread still warm and mean with butter. Mrs. Patel poured chai into chipped mugs and told a story about Naomi fixing her back steps and refusing payment with a laugh and a pie. The Tuesday girls promised June they'd come back on Thursdays just to make the joke wrong. Miguel told me the plant missed me and also didn't, the way places do when they don't know what they lost until they need it. We didn't make speeches. We told small stories out of order, which is the true way a life gets remembered. The ledgers sat on the corner of the bench with names crossed out and recircled, not to say paid and done, but to say here and again. People signed their hours back into the book next to new promises: bring cookies, loan lathe, teach dovetail to 5 kids who think wood hates them. It stopped looking like a debt and started looking like a calendar. As sun slid to late, I flipped the swallow breaker off and on, like a kid who'd learned the trick makes light. The birds faded and bloomed. The bench stayed. At dusk, June pressed play again, just to hear Naomi's last sentences one more time. Grief is a bench. You don't sit on it alone. You set things on it together. The room hushed like a pew without feeling like church. People trickled out, hugs that didn't linger too long. Saturday, Mr. Hollis said on his way out, like he was already promising the next one. Tuesday, one of the girls said, winking at June, and pointed at the pegboard where Naomi had written their code. She said, "Lark and swallow lives," a vow disguised as a joke.
We swept, not to erase the day, just to make sure tomorrow wouldn't slip. June tucked the chisels into their paper like putting animals back to sleep. Gabe relabeled the subpanel in his precise block letters. Swallow stayed, but below it a new strip of blue tape went on. Bench light. He held the Sharpie out to me. "You do it," he said. I wrote it in my crooked hand instead, on purpose, to remind myself this room held my lines too. We turned off the lights. The bench glowed a little anyway, the way finished wood stores sun the rest of the day didn't get. In the doorway, June hooked her arm in mine like she used to when the sidewalk looked too big. "Dad," she said. I said, because I didn't want to hurry the way her voice had changed shape. "I'm not scared I'll forget her laugh anymore," she said, testing the sentence to see if it held. "It's all over this room, even in the parts we messed up." She paused. "Especially there. Have you ever realized the sound you're most afraid of losing is safe because you finally let other people sing?" We locked the shop. The night didn't feel like a fief. I slipped Naomi's ring from the red thread and set it in the walnut dish on the new bench. It looked right there, close, not clutching. June traced the carved swallow on the apron with one finger and smiled, a small, dangerous thing that meant we were going to be okay, in a way that didn't ask the world's permission. When I finally slept, my dreams were sawdust and birds and the polite click of mechanisms that know when they fit. In the morning, before coffee, I walked straight to the shop. I flipped the swallow breaker. The flock lit like we were a joke they were in on now. I put my palm on the bench. It held, the way it was designed to. Weight shared across good joints, tool marks left on purpose, names burned into chest and wood. I don't know what will happen next month or next year. I know how to ask for soup now. I know where the key fits. I know the river can carry what I can't. I know the birds remember, even with the lights off. I know "don't open that box alone" is less a warning than a way forward. And I know this. When the next box shows up, paperwork, diagnosis, confession, a kid crying in a doorway because a grade turned into a story,
We'll put it on the bench Naomi designed. We'll read the plan. We'll turn the eye. We'll wait for the click. And we won't open it alone. A week later, I caught myself reaching for the workshop light without bracing first. Have you ever realized the thing you were most afraid of, flipping a switch, had turned into a habit you trust? Tuesday nights came back on their own. The girls showed up with cookie tins and playlists. Dads and neighbors drifted in with excuses that sounded like tool names. We stopped calling it Tuesday Girls because Naomi would have rolled her eyes at gatekeeping. Someone taped a new card to the pegboard, Swallow Nights. Under it, names in thick marker with birds doodled beside them. The ledger wasn't a ledger anymore. It was a calendar, where 6.5 hours used to make my stomach knot. See you Saturday made my shoulders drop. We carved 2 more little swallows into the front apron the second week, Hollis and Gabe, and left a clean strip of wood for whoever we need next. Add more when you need more people, Naomi wrote. It's astonishing how often need isn't a failure. It's proof you're building something bigger than your 2 hands. The wildflowers by the willow did what Naomi promised. The wrong season grew green anyway. I walked down there alone one morning with coffee in the sawdust jar, not to dig anything up, just to stand where the river kept its word. The stones we'd thrown were already part of the bottom, still there, less sharp. Have you ever apologized to water for not trusting it and felt forgiven? At home, small boxes kept arriving, the kind you don't bury in walls. Envelopes with windows, emails that use words like urgent, a text from a coach asking if June's okay to miss practice because grief burps when it wants to. We didn't hide them under dishes or guilt. We said bench it. That became our family code. We put the heavy thing on Naomi's bench, flipped the swallow breaker, and let the birds remind us who to text. Then we opened it together. Sometimes together is me and June and a pot of oversalted soup.
Sometimes it's 5 bodies and 8 clamps, and a neighbor who says, "I'm just holding the light," like that isn't the whole job. Gabe started keeping butterscotch in a coffee can by the door like a sacrament. He labels the panel with my crooked handwriting now because he says the room needs to see both our lines. Mr. Hollis pretends he doesn't cry when a kid seats a chisel clean on the first try. Mrs. Patel taught us how to fold samosa dough on the break between glue-ups. The Tuesday girls claimed one corner of the pegboard for their accomplishments and mistakes, equal parts trophy and warning. If you read it out loud, it sounds like a town learning to name itself. Sometimes I still freeze for a breath when I see Naomi's handwriting, on the back of a stud, on that bird panel, on that blueprint with pencil smudges where her thumb lived. But the freeze isn't terror anymore. It's reverence. It's the pause a room takes before someone says grace. And that sentence on the wall, it stopped being a warning and became a design note for my life. Don't open that box alone. It's about electricity, yes, but it's also about the kind of strength I was raised to mistrust. I used to think strong meant silent, meant solo, meant my back taking the load until the boards creaked. Strong is this instead. Making a bench from a plan that leaves room for names you don't know yet. Asking a neighbor to bring soup and meaning it. Letting your kids see you cry and then asking her to hold the other end while you carry the thing out to the truck. Naomi said I wouldn't replace her by loving again. I'd honor her by loving at all. I don't know when or if that part of the blueprint gets built. For now, I put her ring in the walnut dish when I need both hands and loop it back on the red thread when the house goes quiet and I want weight at my throat that isn't fear. When I touch it, it taps the pendant softly, a sound like a bird on glass. Here, here, here. One night, a storm rolled over the house hard enough to make the old you in me get loud. The lights flickered, muscle memory reached for panic, and then I smiled. I walked to the panel and flipped swallow. Warm honey filled the rafters. The flock glowed. June came in barefoot, hair wild, a donut in one hand, the other threading itself into my elbow without asking. "Bench it?" she asked, eyes this time not scared, just ready. We set tomorrow's little box beside the walnut dish. We sharpened a pencil. We read the notes Naomi left in the margins like she knew who we'd be when the weather came. If you came to this story looking for a twist, here it is. The box in the wall didn't solve us, it introduced us. To each other again, to a room that knows our names, to a way of moving grief into motion so it stops chewing holes in your floor. Some boxes are secrets, some are instructions. The difference is whether you open them alone. I thought the scariest part would be what I found inside. It wasn't. It was learning that my life is better built with 4 hands, not 2, with names burned into birds and mistakes written where we can see them later and feel less alone. You don't have to love wood to get this. You just need a flat place and people, a kitchen table, a church basement, the back of a truck bed in a parking lot after a bad appointment. Put the thing down. Flip whatever passes for swallow where you are. Call the names. Let them show up wrong and try again. Tell the truth on stones and trust the river. When I lock the shop at night, the bench looks back at me like a promise I finally kept. The motto shines in my head even with the power off. And if I catch myself carrying a box down the hallway with my shoulders high and my jaw tight, I hear Naomi say it in that bossy voice that saved me from myself. Don't open that box alone. So I don't. I put it on the bench. I call for hands. And we build the next piece together. A month later, we finally painted the workshop red barn like Naomi promised herself a dozen summers ago and kept giving away to other people's projects. June stenciled swallows under the eaves, small, mid-turn, a flock flying nowhere in particular because home isn't a direction, it's a decision. Gabe fixed the door that used to stick when it rained and left a faint, merciful squeak in the hinge because he said every good room needs a sound to announce you. Mr. Hollis signed the inside of the trim where no one will see it. I wrote our names behind the light switch, D and J, so our fingers touch them every time we turn the day on. The ledger turned into a wall calendar and then into a group text, soup emojis and clamp emojis, and too many bird emojis because that's who we are now. Tuesday stopped asking permission. Saturday learned our last names. The bench got nicked and dented and someone set a mug down without a coaster and I didn't flinch. Have you ever watched yourself not defend a museum and realize you finally live there? One afternoon, June said, "Mom left us a tin. We should leave one too." So we went to the river with a small box that used to hold screws and now held future mercies. We put inside 2 flat stones with new words. We asked. We laughed. A packet of wildflower seeds with wrong season scribbled across it like a dare. A note in our shared handwriting. If you found this because something got heavy, bench it, bring someone. Flip whatever passes for swallow where you are. Eat a cookie. We kissed the lid like Naomi made us, locked it with the tiny skeleton key, and buried it beside the willow where the ground already knew our hands. Have you ever written a letter to a version of yourself you hope some stranger will grow into? At home, I stuck a small strip of blue tape under the panel's swallow label and wrote in my ugly letters, "Ask." Not because it controls anything, because it reminds me what does. A week after that, the phone rang late. Mrs. Patel's nephew, college kid with a good heart and a car that coughs, had found a box in her attic behind a row of yellowed recipes. "It's probably dumb," he said, which is exactly what you say when it isn't. "Come over?" I almost said first thing in the morning. Then I heard Naomi in every syllable I didn't want to carry alone. "Give us 15, I said, and texted June and Gabe a swallow emoji like a bat signal somebody finally taught me how to use. We didn't open Mrs. Patel's box for her. We didn't need to. We set it on her kitchen table, poured chai, called her sister on speaker, and let her tell us which letter to read first. Sometimes help is just a bench that isn't in your house. There are still days I reach for the past and my hand comes up with air. Days the ring in the walnut dish looks lonelier than holy, and I loop it back on the red thread because I want weight at my throat that isn't a mistake. But even then, the workshop holds. The birds don't go anywhere when I turn them off. The ledger remembers what the river knows. Things sink and soften and become part of what carries you. If you came looking for proof, here's what I've got. The box didn't fix us. It taught us where to put our hands. Naomi's handwriting on the back of a board became a life we step into on purpose. Don't open that box alone. It's not just a rule for electricity, it's a design spec for being alive. So when the next box shows up, with a window on the front and numbers in the corner, and words that make your ribs feel too tight, or when a kid stands in a doorway with an apology half-built, or a neighbor knocks with a casserole and a story she can't carry from the porch to the sink by herself, we do what the plan says. We put it on the bench. We flip, swap.
We call the names burned into birds and the ones we haven't carved yet. We laugh wrong, then right. We write our mistakes where somebody kinder can find them later and feel less alone. And we build the next piece. Fat tenons, 2 clamps minimum, tool marks on purpose, together.